Hello, everyone. It is lovely to have you all join today for the launch of our Time Well Spent 2023, Volunteering Amongst the Global Majority. It's an exciting day. Volunteering is an amazing way for people to give back to their community, and we see countless examples of this in action. In turn, we also have responsibility to provide quality volunteer opportunities to ensure volunteers get the most out of their experience. And it's important for us to learn continually and to improve so that we can support volunteers in the best way possible. Over the past 5 years, NCVO's Time Well Spent research has provided valuable insights about volunteers' experiences. This latest research focuses on understanding the experiences and perspectives of people from the global majority. And this term is used to capture the experiences of all ethnic groups except white British and other white minority groups. So this includes people from Black, Asian, mixed, and other ethnic groups, often referred to as ethnic minorities. It is exciting because this research is the first of its kind. And we really are keen to share the findings today alongside the reflections of a great panel. And of course, it's also just the beginning. The important thing that we're doing today is to start the conversations, and we'd encourage you to also join in with your thoughts and questions. By the end of today, we hope you will have learned about the latest findings from our new research, heard our expert panel's initial reflections on the policy and practice implications, and had the opportunity to share your own questions and reflections with our team, the panel, and other attendees. I'm going to talk you through the agenda now. First, we're going to hear from NCVO's Amy McGarvey, who's our Research and Insight Manager, with a covering of the research findings. And then we have our three panel members. Thank you very much to our wonderful panel for joining, who are going to give their initial reflections. We have Baris Varley, National Emergencies and Members Engagement Coordinator from Muslim Charities Forum, Paul Harvey, Head of Volunteering from Voluntary Action Sheffield, and Caris Morris-Brown, Workforce Development Manager from Black Cultural Archives. We'll then go into a Q&A session, and part of our panel for that Q&A will also be NCVO's Whoosh Raza, who is our Director of People, Culture and Inclusion. And Whoosh will then give us some concluding reflections. And we will finish on time, I promise, for 11:30. I'm now going to take you through some housekeeping. You'll see that closed captions or subtitles have been enabled, and you can turn these on and off by clicking on the CC icon in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. We'll also share the PowerPoint slide deck for today in the chat. And if it helps with accessibility, you can download these to computers that you can zoom in and out of the slides as we go along. We hope you have a coffee to hand, as we'll be running straight through until 11:30. Now, I hope you have lots of questions. So if you do have questions for our researchers or panelists, please could you post them via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. I know that a lot of people will put things into the chat, and that's marvellous, but we don't want to lose any questions in all that will go on in the chat. So please use the Q&A function. Everyone has joined today's event in view-only mode, so your microphones are automatically muted and cameras are switched off. And as you will have heard, we are recording today's event, but the only people who will appear on that recording are the presenters and panelists. So, without more ado, I am going to hand you over to Amy McGarvey, who is going to take us through the research. She's NCVO's Research and Insight Manager. And before I hand over, please, as your thoughts come to you and your questions come to you, put them in the Q&A function and we'll gather them up. Thank you. And over to you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Priya. It's great to be here to share the findings from this research. Before I talk about the findings, I'll start by just giving a little bit of background to Time Well Spent and this particular strand of it. We're really lucky to have great data from the government's Community Life Survey on volunteering participation. As you can see from the slide here, This spans a number of years to give us a sense of trends over time, and it also includes a breakdown by ethnic group. What we've seen in the last years is a general trend of decline across all groups, though participation among those from a mixed ethnic background did rise in the latest results. But we'll have to see how this continues to look, especially in the next findings, which will be released in the new year. Our Time Well Spent programme complements this participation data by focusing on a different but equally important aspect of volunteering, and that's the experience. And it also helps us to understand that participation data better. The research that we're talking about today has undergone its own Time Well Spent journey. When we released the first report back in 2019, the experiences of the global majority was identified as a gap. We were limited in what we could say by low sample sizes at that stage. We explored the issue of diversity as a whole in a focus report in 2020, but this was primarily from the organisational perspective and diversity in the widest sense. It was then in developing the new series in 2023 that alongside the 7,000 nationally representative sample, and the results of this was what we published in June, we included a boost sample of 1,000 global majority respondents. And this is what's allowed us to address this gap in evidence by being able to explore experiences among the global majority in more depth. And that's the result, is the report that we're launching today. And we're really grateful that the Department for Culture, Media and Sports, recognising the complementary aspects to this research and also the value of it, have funded the work in our 2023 series. So our specific aims of the research were threefold. Firstly, as I mentioned, it was around understanding experiences around volunteering among the global majority in more depth. The second was around comparing the experience of those from the global majority with volunteers and non-volunteers overall. And we use this overall perspective, and I'll be talking about this comparison at several points in the presentation today, as representative of what we might think of as an average or a typical experience of a volunteer or a non-volunteer. This was the basis of the main Time Well Spent findings we shared in June. And what we wanted to do now was to build on this, bringing in the global majority findings and compare, so that we can then support volunteer practitioners to kind of build that overall understanding, as well as thinking about the specific needs among the global majority. We also wanted to look at barriers and enablers to volunteering. Those barriers in particular are something that we feel is particularly important for the global majority. And through these aims, what we ultimately wanted to do was to draw insights to help improve experiences of global majority volunteers and address barriers to volunteering through practical and policy considerations. I should also mention at this point that whilst we recognise there's lots of different forms of volunteering, including those that are informal, that we're focusing on formal volunteering through groups, clubs and organisations. I won't go too much into the detail of the methods as this is outlined fully in our report, but the findings are mainly drawn from our survey of adults across Great Britain, which I mentioned, a combination of the main nationally representative sample and the global majority boost. But we also did a rapid evidence review and also conducted workshops with organisations, including those with lived experience and expertise, and we're really grateful for everyone's input. So on to the findings. Before I talk about the volunteer experience, which, as I mentioned, is the core of Time Well Spent, I'll talk a little bit about the context that surrounds it, what we might call the who, what, and why. So starting with the who, our Time Well Spent findings show that global majority volunteers have a slightly different demographic profile compared with volunteers overall, in being younger, and with this more likely to be in paid employment and have children under 18, more religious, and more likely to live in urban areas. These reflect demographic features of global majority population as a whole. But these features differ, especially across different ethnic groups. And these variations highlight the importance of not seeing the global majority as one homogeneous group. When we look at the various aspects of volunteer involvement, such as sector, activity, and cause, our findings highlight the wide-ranging nature of volunteering among the global majority. We see that they most commonly volunteer for a civil society organisation. The most common activities are around giving advice, organising or helping with events, and leading a group, being a trustee or member of a committee. And the top areas or causes that they give to are health, disability, social welfare, religion, and local community or neighbourhood groups. When we look at the comparison with volunteers overall, we do see some differences. So whilst they're most commonly volunteering for a civil society organisation, they're less likely to compared with volunteers overall, and in turn more likely to for public sector and private sector organisations. We saw that leadership roles are one of the more common activities, but when we compare, they are still underrepresented, and we see the same when it comes to representative roles as well. And I mentioned that religion was the second most common cause, and in fact, they're twice as likely to volunteer for a religious cause compared with volunteers overall. And we see religion crop up again when we look at motivations. Being part of religious belief or philosophy of life to help people was a stronger motivation among global majority volunteers. This was also the same with career-related benefits being a motivator. This is likely to be related to the younger age profile that I mentioned. However, it's the cause being important and wanting to improve things and help people that are the strongest motivations overall for the global majority. Something that builds on motivations that we explored in Time Well Spent was what those from the global majority value if or when they're volunteering. And this was asked to both volunteers and non-volunteers. And what this highlights is that from a range of different factors, there being a culture of respect and trust in the organisation was most important. This was also the case for the overall population, but it was stronger among global majority survey respondents. Another factor that was higher among global majority respondents was there being people from a wide range of background and cultures. And together, this highlights that culture and diversity are particularly important for those from the global majority. And we'll come back to this in relation to experience a little bit later. So moving on to experience. Starting with the bigger picture, satisfaction levels among global majority volunteers are high. 86% of global majority volunteers report being very or fairly satisfied. And when they look at the benefits, they also cite a wide range of benefits, especially a sense of personal achievement and feeling of making a difference, which come up top. And this shows that global majority volunteers perceive a benefit to them personally as well as though in giving to others. However, compared with volunteers overall, satisfaction is lower. As you can see, 92% of volunteers overall compared with 86% of global majority volunteers. And there's the biggest difference when you look at those who are very satisfied, 36% global majority compared with 50% volunteers overall. When we look within the global majority, there are some groups that are less likely to report being satisfied. Younger compared with older volunteers, disabled compared with non-disabled, and public sector compared with civil society volunteers. There are similar patterns of difference as volunteers overall, but the level of satisfaction is also relatively lower among global majority volunteers for disabled and public sector volunteers. Additionally, we see variations in satisfaction across different ethnic groups, with Black volunteers reporting the highest levels of satisfaction. So going back to the lower satisfaction figure that I just cited, we wanted to understand this a little bit better and what might be behind it. And so we did more in-depth analysis to identify the specific factors that are influencing volunteer satisfaction. And what we found is that age and disability are demographic factors which negatively influence volunteer satisfaction. But what actually impacts on it most is volunteer experience. This slide highlights some of the key features of experience which we identified most positively or negatively impact on satisfaction. So I want to touch on 4 key themes from these. And these might explain some of those lower levels of satisfaction. And if we flip that around, in turn, it helps us practically understand what are the areas for those engaging global majority volunteers that we might look to prioritise. So the first is around organisational culture. I mentioned in the context section that a culture of respect and trust is valued most among the global majority. And we've just seen that this is also a key factor in influencing volunteer satisfaction. And what we find is that global majority volunteers are less positive about this aspect of volunteering. As you can see here, 77% agree with this statement compared with 86% of volunteers overall. They're also less positive about broader aspects of organisational culture, such as raising an issue and there being tensions and conflicts in the organisation. The second is around feelings of exclusion, which are higher among global majority volunteers, in fact, twice as high. And a lower proportion say that they feel a sense of belonging to the organisation. Again, one of the key factors we saw that influence satisfaction. Throughout this research, we look through an intersectional lens, and some findings highlight the additional barriers that some groups face. And here we see this in the lower proportion of those from lower socioeconomic groups when it comes to feelings of belonging. And disabled global majority volunteers, 1 in 5 say that they felt excluded, which is much higher than global majority volunteers on average. The third area is recognition, which of all the factors that identified influencing satisfaction came up most strongly. When we ask about importance of recognition, half of global majority volunteers say that it's important, higher than volunteers overall, but a lower proportion say that they feel recognised enough, 73% compared with 82%. Finally, the expectations being placed on global majority volunteers. 37% of global majority volunteers say that the organisation has unreasonable expectations in terms of how much they do, compared with 24% of volunteers overall. And we see a similar thing when it comes to the statement around my unpaid help is becoming too much like paid work. So these 4 areas that I've just gone through, organisational culture, inclusion and belonging, recognition and expectations, these areas, the evidence points towards explaining those lower satisfaction levels. And as factors which particularly strongly influence satisfaction, in turn, they're aspects of the volunteer experience that we might look to prioritise when engaging global majority volunteers. So now moving on to retention, we see a very similar picture here in terms of what we saw for satisfaction. 2/3 of global majority volunteers say that they're likely to continue in the next 12 months. This is a bit lower than volunteers overall. And we see that the biggest difference is in those who are very likely, 34% versus 50%. And given the same pattern, it's not surprising to see that the majority of those who are satisfied continue, whereas a lower proportion of dissatisfied volunteers do. We also see a similar group of less satisfied volunteers also less likely to continue. And whether it be reasons for continuing or not continuing, we see that there's a mix of value-based and practical reasons. A notable reason for continuing that's higher among global majority volunteers was a sense of duty or obligation, where 37% of global majority volunteers stated this, as you can see in the box there. Finally, we look at barriers and enablers to volunteering, and this focuses on global majority non-volunteers, those who haven't volunteered recently or who have never volunteered. What we find here is encouraging. Our findings indicate that there's an appetite to volunteer among the global majority, more so than non-volunteers overall, with 1 in 5 having looked into volunteering in the last 12 months, compared with 12% of non-volunteers overall. Global majority non-volunteers are also less likely to say that nothing would encourage them to volunteer. When we look at the specific barriers among non-volunteers, the top barriers are around time and commitment. And this is broadly similar to what we see for non-volunteers overall in the general population. But it's interesting to note that while a similar proportion, concerns around not fitting in with people are ranked more highly as a barrier among global majority non-volunteers, showing that it's relatively more important compared with other barriers for the global majority non-volunteers. There are also some other examples, as you can see on the slide. But linked with the findings around exclusion that I mentioned earlier, the findings indicate that perhaps for some, these fears around exclusion may be well-founded. Finally, if we turn it on the flip side to look at what might encourage non-volunteers, the things that overall would most encourage them are around flexibility, whether it be the time committed or about the way that they give their time. I also want to mention that a couple of areas which are stronger enablers for global majority non-volunteers. That includes being aware of opportunities and career-related benefits. Again, this matches what we saw in initial motivations. Another aspect which is interesting was around the entry process being easier and quicker. This was higher among global majority non-volunteers. And when we look at the data from volunteers themselves, we find that global majority volunteers have higher expectation of the speed of the entry process, but are generally less positive about this stage, indicating that it's a worthwhile area of focus. Finally, for some specific groups, family and friends and other people getting involved may be a particular draw. We found this in particular with Asian non-volunteers, in particular Pakistani non-volunteers, and those from a mixed ethnic backgrounds. So that's a little whistle-stop tour of the findings. There's so much in the report, and this is just a snapshot really of what we found. I'm just going to share a few reflections and considerations for practice and policy. When in June we released our main 2023 findings, we reported that volunteer satisfaction overall had fallen slightly since our original report in 2019. Building on this with our work on the global majority, we find that compared with volunteers overall, global majority volunteers feel even less satisfied, more excluded, and less likely to continue volunteering compared with volunteers overall. But appetite for volunteering exists. And we found that, in fact, it indicates that people from the global majority are more interested in volunteering than the overall population. So to improve experiences, we need to make sure that future volunteers from the global majority get what they're looking for from their volunteering. In this research, we made a really deliberate effort to make sure that there were some practical next steps, something that we heard from organisations when we did our 2020 Diversity and Volunteering report was, I don't know where to start. And so we wanted to share some really practical and tangible things to consider in your organisations, including at different stages across the volunteer journey. And we mapped this out fully in the report with links to different guidance, and we plan to do this more with these considerations to support organisations in their next steps. Just to highlight a few key things, at the recruitment and entry stage, based on the findings relating to both volunteers and non-volunteers, that quick and easy entry process could get the volunteer experience off to a really good start. And we've also talked about the importance of volunteer motivations. During volunteering, the findings highlight the importance of building that culture of respect, trust, and inclusion, as well as recognizing and valuing volunteers. And finally, for retaining volunteers, the findings highlight the importance of experience, especially around the aspects which most influence satisfaction, but also where volunteer journeys do end. And we know that there are lots of different reasons for that to happen. We need to take the opportunity to actively learn from global majority volunteers and receive that feedback. We also need to have the right environment for global majority volunteering to thrive. And whilst I won't go into these in great detail, there are also a number of policy considerations, especially around championing volunteering and valuing volunteers, and importantly, building a better understanding of our global majority volunteers and the barriers that they face. So that is really everything for now. I'd really encourage you to look at the full reports, and I will hand back now to Priya, and really looking forward to hearing the reflections from our panel.
Thank you very much, Amy, and thank you for taking us so expertly through those key findings. Just to remind everyone, the term global majority is used to capture the experiences of all ethnic groups except white British and other white minority groups. So encapsulates people from Black, Asian, mixed and other ethnic groups who are often referred to as ethnic minorities. You'll see in the chat and the Q&A some of those links to the definitions that have been used. Now, may I start to introduce our panel members? I'm delighted that we're joined by three of our colleagues who are going to give their initial reflections. So again, please put questions in the Q&A and we'll gather those as we're going along. I'm going to start by introducing Baris Bali, who's National Emergencies and Members Engagement Coordinator from Muslim Charities Forum. And Baris, of course, will bring a perspective from a global majority-led organisation, faith organisation, and as a Vision for Volunteering partner. Welcome, Baris. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Before I begin, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'd like to begin off by saying thank you to NCVO. Thank you for Amy and Ray when she was around. It was been a great exercise being a part of this focus group and contributing to this research. What's important to note, a lot of the volunteering that's done in faith organization is done informally, so it was crucial that we actually fed that information and shared that experience and allowed us to actually be a part of this project, and we really are thankful for that. It's important to note that the people from the global majority, a lot of them do come from faith backgrounds, and this is often not recognized or not seen, or just we are not as cognizant of it when we are operating in certain settings, and we need to be very conscious of this. And the statistics actually show that. So almost a fifth of the people who come from a global majority background do volunteer for religious purposes. And they're twice as likely when compared to the general, the English population. And this is very important to note. So when we do develop policy, when we do develop sort of a volunteer infrastructure, it's important to note that their experiences, and they may have sensitivities that they might not feel as comfortable as coming out, but we should actually reach out to them and ask them. I think this is really important to note. Volunteering in a religious setting it varies. So you can have the informal volunteers, for example, in mosques, you'd have all the way from an elder in the community that's just cleaning the mosque to a younger who is actually taking part in the local madrasa and helping out other students, all the way to food banks who are nationally recognized, and to national organizations who actually go out and do aid work. And these sort of differences need to be acknowledged. However, what we have noticed from our own research is there is a lack of taking into consideration religious sensitivities in the mainstream organizations. Now, this could be due to the fact that religion still remains a taboo subject in our sector, and this is something that we have to really talk about, where racially, in terms of gender, sexual orientation, and ethical discourses and intersectionalities are considered. But religion still seems to be one of those topics that we need to maybe explore a little bit more and be more forthcoming in understanding some of the challenges as well as the opportunities there to provide a better experience for volunteering, which is why it's so important and so crucial that we're a part of the Vision for Volunteering partnership. I believe that it has provided a platform for us to actually voice the concerns of some of the religious volunteering experiences, and to actually develop policy, to influence policy, and to actually provide a platform for us to actually share the experiences of Muslim volunteering. And this is something that, in my opinion, hasn't been done before, and it's something revolutionary. So we would like to definitely preach that it has definitely been something that has been extraordinary for us, and that sort of experience is something that was missing in our sector. And I think I will end it there, and thank you again for providing us with the opportunity to talk about volunteering from the global majority background and to share the experiences of some of the religious nuances and some of the considerations that we have to have in volunteering moving forward.
Thank you very much, Baris. Really interesting insights there and reflections. I'm going to move us on then to our second panelist, Paul Harvey, who's Head of Volunteering at Voluntary Action Sheffield. And Paul brings, of course, the perspective of local organisations and infrastructure, local infrastructure. So welcome, Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Priya. Thanks, Amy, for the report on NCVO. It's a pleasure to be here. So yeah, I've worked at that and being that perspective of a volunteer centre that's supporting volunteering across the city, working with hundreds of organisations to promote and build volunteering. And what's a bit unique about our project, our volunteer centre, is we've had a project for nearly 20 years helping refugees and asylum seekers to get into or to access volunteering. And so we've benefited from getting direct feedback from people about the barriers and issues that they've had. And we've also benefited from having a massively rich insight from co-delivering a service with refugee volunteers for nearly 20 years. And by refugee, I mean refugee and asylum seeker. I think the first thing I want to do is recognise just the huge experience and knowledge and wisdom that I have found from involving global majority volunteers. They've totally shaped our project, and I've learned hugely, and that's a massive benefit to me and my team and organisation. But they're definitely not one homogenous group. I think often people kind of see refugees and global majority individuals as people in need of help. And my experience has been we've needed the support of refugees to do things well. And there's massive benefits that we've had. And I would encourage everyone to just see them from an asset-based perspective. I really connect with the results of this report, so pleased to see that research. And I think I want to talk about three key things. One is around recruitment, one is around welcome, and the third one is about genuine value. And that we are talking about global majority, but they're quite obviously not one group. And the skill set and range of expertise is vast. And so we don't want to minimise that group. The report really shows how people are driven by purpose and impact. That massively connects with our experience. But our experience is also that often, unlike Barris is talking about the faith thing, we overwhelmingly are working with charities who are secular, not religious. And our experience is that people often can't get into volunteering without a personal recommendation. And so for people who are not in the circles of the organisation, they can't get in. And so please do inclusive recruitment, advertise for your volunteer centres, make it transparent what your role is, what the benefits are, that you welcome global majority volunteers, that you value their experience. Stating it and stating how this might help them move into work or the skills they'll develop, and critically what the skills they need, so you might have a fair rejection process, is something that's basic. I'm imagining that most people on this call will already be doing that. It's not universal from my experience of working with lots of charities. The second thing is around welcoming, being practical. If there was one thing that I'd say is the boomerang issue, that is the barrier that comes back almost weekly, is around paying expenses. I can't tell you how many times refugees have come to me and because they'll tell me things they won't tell their charity. And they'll say, you know, Paul, why do organisations make me beg for pennies, going cap in hand to my master? They don't have to ask for their salaries. Why do I have to beg for my bus fare? Or they'll say, like, if they've got time to give me tasks to do, why can't they offer me expenses? This is literally hundreds of times. So please, if there's any one message, proactively offer expenses, make it explicit up front, and make sure they know they are worth a bus ticket. I mean, that is like the baseline. If you're not worth a bus ticket, or you don't feel like you're worth a bus ticket, you're not going to stay, and then build from there. And then it's that building, which is around authentic value. For us in our project, we know the richness that comes from involving and co-delivery, and I think that comes across. You know, if you genuinely want to involve and diversify your volunteers, that real deep internal what is our purpose here? Why are we trying to do that? What are we wanting to achieve? Because if you work that out, then I think the real thing about the obvious thing is, well, how can we make people feel really welcomed and connect with local faith groups, connect with local kind of organizations, global majority-led organizations, learn from your volunteers, as I say. And the final one is around trusteeship and governance and leadership. There's a minority of people in that role. There's loads of research about how exclusive that is. Following Black Lives Matter, everybody came to us and they would say, right, Paul, can you give me a refugee for my board? And there was definitely an element of performative action about it, and it was quite shallow, and that's quite obvious. And from chatting to people, they would say, Paul, if I attend, I won't speak. If I speak, they won't listen. And if my voice doesn't lead to change, why should I go? So I'd say before going out and specifically recruiting, really think about how you are going to make people who feel excluded from decision-making processes really valued, and how you're going to ensure that their voice will lead to action and change. But there's some challenges and barriers. We all know that. Everyone here is obviously here because they want to make a difference. So I just want to say thank you for that, and thank you for NCVO for putting this report together. And it's really positive that we've got this in a really public dialogue. So I'll stop there and thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Paul. And we're really building, aren't we, on those themes of purpose, value, impact, what it means to be included, what it means to be part of something. Let's move now to our third panellist. Welcome Caris Morris-Brown, who's Workforce Development Manager at Black Cultural Archives, and of course brings another global majority-led organisation's perspective as well. Welcome, Caris, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I've been told I have 5 minutes. I haven't timed myself, but I'm sure Priya will gently tell me to move on if I overrun. For me, in this report, I could definitely see myself. I've often volunteered my time, but I never used to think of it as volunteering, whether it be a church activity or helping someone in my community. These acts of kindness to me seemed a part of life, something that everyone I knew did, and nothing to be counted as volunteering. That's something I thought you did in a very fixed way. As I got older, I did become a volunteer in the official sense as I thought of it. I saw posters and adverts on job sites and in train stations. Images or causes spoke to me. The language used showed me that I had the skills and availability to be able to give. I had always wanted to volunteer for different reasons at different stages of my life. I saw it as a way of developing skills, supporting causes I felt passionate about, and sharing my professional skills to help others. And just as the report has highlighted, I too have been put off from pursuing or continuing volunteer opportunities due to cumbersome applications that felt more like job applications, slow onboarding processes, travel expenses not being reimbursed, rigidity, if I can say the word, in the time commitments needed, and when my circumstances changed, no flexibility in the commitment needed was offered to me. I think the most negative experience of volunteering I have had was experiencing my concerns not being taken seriously. It felt like a lack of trust and respect from the organisation that had benefited from my time and help given. But these experiences haven't deterred me from volunteering, quite the opposite. I know the transformational benefits of volunteering for both volunteer and organisation. My career has been dedicated to this transaction, and the report highlights so many points of opportunity to engage, support, and benefit from global majority involvement with our organisations. As part of my role working on Black Cultural Archives Seeing Ourselves project, where we look at how we make the arts and heritage sector a more equitable space to work for global majority communities, we see the glass ceiling of progression onto senior leadership positions and board roles. The Time Well Spent report highlights the same issue of global majority volunteers less likely to be in roles of leadership. To me, this shows that much of the work we need to do to support our workforce, we should extend to our volunteers. The imbalance in leadership roles among global majority volunteers may stem from systemic issues such as unconscious biases, cultural stereotypes, and historical inequalities. It is crucial to dismantle these barriers and create inclusive environments that empowers volunteers from all backgrounds to assume leadership roles. Leadership training programs like the Black on Board training that we run at BCA and mentorship initiatives can be instrumental in bridging this gap, offering valuable support to global majority volunteers aspiring to take on more prominent responsibilities. A key revelation to me is that global majority volunteers place immense value on a culture of respect and trust within their organizations. This cultural foundation is not only conducive to personal satisfaction, but also serves as a catalyst for increased engagement and commitment. When volunteers feel respected and trusted, they are more likely to contribute their unique perspectives and talents, fostering a rich, more dynamic volunteer community. This understanding is a great moment for organizations to live the values many of us proclaim to hold, of respect and trust. In many conversations on volunteer recruitment that I've been a part of, there have been questions as to what will draw volunteers to our organization. The report has highlighted global majority volunteers often perceive a wide array of benefits from their engagement in volunteering. Let's use these perceptions to position our roles as the role that will meet those benefits. And let's do it truthfully as well. An aspect of volunteering is the recognition that the positive effects of our actions are not confined to a specific group or community. The concept of what we do for one group benefits us all, underscores the interconnectedness of global challenges and the potential of volunteers to address them collectively. By embracing this philosophy, volunteer organizations can foster a sense of shared responsibility and encourage volunteers to collaborate across diverse backgrounds and experiences, amplifying the impact of their collective efforts. What we put in place to support one group often benefits us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caris. And thank you again to all three of our panelists. We're going to move now into our Q&A session, and it's great to see the conversations in the chat. I think the benefit of bringing us together around this topic, as well as to understanding what the research is showing us, is also the conversation that we're now starting to have, which really is exploring what this means in practice. What are we going to do with this information? How are we going to take things forward? And these initial reflections from Baris, from Paul, from Caris have been really helpful in that. So as we go now into our Q&A session, let's just revisit first the definitions. So I'm going to ask Amy first. Could you explain more about the term global majority and which groups are included as part of this term?
Sure, thank you, Priya. Yeah, I think it's really good just to keep reiterating this, as I'm sure Wish can come in to talk a bit more about. We feel it's really important to, we know that language is so important. And when we use the term global majority, we're referring to all ethnic groups except white British and other white groups. That includes white minorities. So that's Black, Asian, those from mixed ethnic backgrounds, and some others as well. But that's the term that we're using for global majority. So we realise that it might not be a familiar term for some, but hopefully that clarifies who exactly we're talking about.
Thank you very much, Amy. And I'm going to ask Bush just to come in as well, just on why NCVO is using the term global majority.
Yeah, absolutely, Priya. Thank you. And yeah, thank you to everyone so far. It's been an absolutely brilliant and thought-provoking conversation. Global majority as a term, is so first I would like to extend my thanks to NCVO actually of being part of the organisation, and we've had some really deep thought-provoking conversations over the year to really think about the term and why language is so important. And I'd like to start with that point around the importance of language. The term BAME, which many of you may know, has actually derived from the civil service and from government, but the term was actually created by people who did not identify as members of the BAME community. And I think as we look at what inclusion really means and how we can make sure every voice is included in shaping the experiences of volunteering and actually, working across our sector, it's really important that we use terminology that people can actually relate to and understand. So this builds on some brilliant work led on by Rosemary Campbell-Stevens in terms of why the term global majority is factually accurate, with non-white groups making up over 80% of the global population, and a reframing of power dynamics that potentially were at play in reference to calling the groups minorities or BAME effectively non-white. And so the decision to adopt the term global majority was really to support us as we build our efforts in decolonising our language at NCVO and looking at ways in which we can provide a more inclusive organisation across not just our organisation but hopefully for the wider sector. So hopefully that's helpful, Priya.
Thank you very much, Wish. Very helpful. Now we have some great questions about the research findings and also about involvement and inclusion. So I'm going to come to those first, involving communities. Baris, may I turn to you? One of the people on the call has asked, do you have any recommendations on organisations to contact about recruiting faith volunteers, or in particular volunteers from the Muslim faith?
Of course, I think we're definitely one of those organizations. One thing that I didn't mention about MCF is that we have a membership of 16 core members. And within our network, we have between 300 to 400 organizations that we contact regularly. So my job is actually principally to actually go around the UK and meet these organizations and see what they're doing and engage with their volunteers. So this weekend, I was actually in Nottingham, where I met a number of volunteers, a number of organizations. But this point of inclusivity is quite important in that if the management team and the trustees don't represent the demographics that are present in their local community, then people will be less likely to volunteer. One of the things that I've seen in volunteering is that people actually are more forthcoming when they see someone like themselves as a trustee, as a member of the management team. They're more likely to actually interact and speak to them and actually want to volunteer, because then there's a journey there that one day I can be in our management position, one day I can be a trustee as well, and keep that legacy going for their community.
So true, so true. And we have a question that asks, we have tried to expand our volunteering opportunities to include newly arrived communities, but find barriers include having to balance safeguarding with lack of references, the financial imperative for people to find paid employment, confusion about legal implications of recruiting volunteers who don't have settled immigration status. So what are thoughts and where can we go for advice? Could I ask Paul to give us some thoughts on that? And then do Baris and Karis let us know if you have thoughts too.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's hugely confusing. The Home Office have put out a thing that's saying that volunteers or that asylum seekers are not allowed to do voluntary work, which for most people in the world would think that you're not allowed to volunteer. But there is an important but technical difference between voluntary work and volunteering. So I'll put a link later to our website where we've tried to explain that difference, but there are no restrictions on volunteering for asylum seekers. They can do anything. There are also It is also possible to get a DBS check for asylum seekers. It's not pleasant because it requires a fingerprinting at the local police station. So it's not a nice experience, but it's possible. So for those who are super motivated and willing to put themselves through that, it's an option. But in terms of the skill set, safeguarding and turnover, I think one of the challenges of the sector is to create structures that allow for high turnover of volunteers, because actually we've said in the it shows in the report, from the global majority, more people want to use their skills to move into work, and we don't structure volunteering in a way that we are happy if somebody moves out to get work. We are frustrated because that's creating a job to recruit the next person. And I think there are some structural changes. We've been piloting that, but that feels fundamental to inclusive volunteering. And in terms of safeguarding and references, you're right. People who are newly arrived won't have references. But I would also say that people who are excluded and have been in the country for years and years often also don't have references from people who we accept. And I say we as in like the white established charity sector don't accept. And so our kind of call has been to say, one, what does a reference really prove? It's often a popularity contest. It's testing your social connections rather than your character. Two, you do need to, it's not necessarily the best thing about safeguarding. So in terms of genuine safeguarding and liability, that's about your structuring. So creating roles where you can observe people, buddy people up, so you can make sure you're keeping your people safe, but you're not allowing sort of structural inequalities to prevent people access.
Thank you very much, Paul. Really helpful. Come on in, Barris.
One of the very important points to consider about refugees is that they did have a life before they came to the UK or whatever country they had ended up, resettling in. A lot of them were engineers, doctors, they had professional qualifications, and this often isn't transferred when they arrived in the UK and they do want to give back. And I've seen this personally. So there needs to be structures in place where these individuals can, and at the very least, give back in the skills and the competencies that they have. And these may be something to consider with some of our large foundations and funds, be able to facilitate these with the refugee organizations and then actually bring these people to actually give them back with the skills and the qualifications that they have.
Thank you very much. It's such an important one, isn't it? The powerful barrier of assumptions and a failure to really see what the possibilities are. Caris, may I turn to you on one of the questions that's come in from Bryony? She says some of these approaches could be interpreted as being paternalistic. Can you suggest ways to give autonomy to global majority volunteers and provide methods for them to provide feedback and steer the direction of volunteering in organisations?
I'm not sure what point she's referring to as paternalistic. I didn't have the same feeling myself, but I think just in her last part of that statement, asking about like feedback, I think if we do provide the opportunities to hear what people have to say and actually act on it. So I know that there's often lots of times that we collect data. I think I'm guilty of it myself, of, annual volunteer surveys or even exit interviews or even right to the beginning of, sorry, I've just been distracted by my daughter. She's getting ready for Christmas pictures. I've asked her dad to put a headband on and it's the wrong one. But anyway, I'm so sorry, she's like a bridesmaid headband on.
You're doing marvelous.
Yeah, thinking about the like some of the data that we collect at the very beginning, almost kind of about ethnicities and stuff like that. What are we actually doing with it? Do we use it to enact change? Do we use it to respond to the concerns that individuals may have? So yeah, I would say continue to build those moments of where you can gather feedback and respond to the needs as they come up.
Thank you very much. And actually building on that, Amy, did the research discover anything or explore the role of current volunteers in creating welcoming and rewarding experiences for global majority volunteers? Previous research, I think, has indicated that this is a key area for volunteering and for voluntary organisations to focus on how existing volunteers shape the volunteering culture.
Thanks, Priya. We didn't look specifically at kind of other volunteers in this sense because the survey was set up to kind of be asked to everybody. But we did do a workshop with organisations as part of this research and captured some of their views, and that kind of role of other, of existing volunteers definitely came up strongly as a barrier to kind of a welcoming and inclusive experience for global majority volunteers. So I think that really highlights that role, the role that existing volunteers have to play. And that, I think we can look at it both ways, can't we? So, both it could be a negative sense in terms of increasing feelings of exclusion, but also if we flip it around, it can be help volunteers kind of feel included if they do so. And I think that's something that we cover in our kind of practical implications around kind of starting that journey right in relation to providing opportunities for kind of, it might just be introducing volunteers to one another. It doesn't have to be anything really like big, but I think even the small ways to help that kind of integration and to help that kind of welcoming experience, especially at the beginning, given that we saw that first entry point is so important to global majority volunteers and really could be either the kind of make or break in terms of their experience kind of going forward. So yeah, definitely an important aspect to think about.
Thank you. And actually, Rhiannon has asked, are there differences when we look at the size of organisations that people are volunteering with, and perhaps differences in level of satisfaction, engagement, or people being asked to give more time? Amy, do you want to start us off on that?
Yeah,
and then
sure.
I'll ask our others to come in.
We don't have a very kind of accurate as such question around size of organisation, purely because this survey is asked to volunteers or kind of potential volunteers, and they won't always know the size of the organisation. We have some different measures, but one thing I think in this context might be worth mentioning is we have a question around the type of kind of the formality of how their volunteering is managed and organised, which goes from kind of paid staff, a paid member of staff organising volunteering through to kind of no one specifically, which I guess is a bit of a kind of formal to informal within the kind of still formal definition. And one of the things that did come out was that almost a quarter, 24% of people whose volunteering is organised by an unpaid member of staff say that the lack of people to continue to take my place was a reason to continue. And that's much higher than those volunteering where it's organised by a paid member of staff, which is 10%. So 24% to 10%, it's a big difference. And I think that kind of indicates in terms of volunteers that may be taking on kind of more responsibility and feeling like they have to continue. We talked about kind of unreasonable expectations and feeling like paid work and things as well. That's also that stat around kind of a sense of obligation. So that's something that whilst it's not kind of directly answering your question around size of organisation, I think that is certainly something that struck us in relation to that potential kind of, it could be an indication of size, I suppose, in terms of that kind of formality of organisation.
Thank you, Amy. And come on in, Caris.
I was just going to say, when I read the report and some of the reasons why people said they were kind of dissatisfied, like the expectations upon them or not feeling like the organisation was going to continue, to me that really spoke to a wider issue that a lot of Black-led or global majority organisations kind of encounter, in that is often having less funding, finding it harder to access funds. All of those have an impact on their ability to deliver their services, see their mission accomplished, but also it has an impact on the volunteers that they engage in. You often then have to ask more of your volunteers, sometimes more than you would like to, because you don't have the structure within the organization. And it's, yeah, you can see the impacts of kind of what the charity sector has to go through, then having an effect on our volunteers.
Thank you. And Baris, come in.
I think to answer the question directly, size definitely matters. From our research, we found out that majority of the smaller organizations, I think it was 60 out of 100 from the research that we done, 50% of them were volunteer led, and the remaining 50% were majority part-time. So as you're scaling an organization, that full-time role sort of starts to come. But it's important to know that these organizations often start off with one person wanting to make a change. They get their friends and they start doing some activities, and then it slowly becomes formal. But before that, it's just literally WhatsApp groups with hundreds of people, and who can volunteer, who can give a time here, who can give a time there. And especially organizations that are more to do with female activities or female-led. We found out that majority of the organizations, I think 56% of them are female-led. And it's very important to note that, because there are certain cultural barriers where women aren't given the facilities or aren't given the sort of positions in formal organizations by the men in their community. So they end up building parallels. And these are some of the organizations, and this is how they manifest their sort of social action.
Thank you both, really helpful. Just talking more about finances. So expenses has come up as a barrier, as it did in the main time well spent 2023 report. From your experience, which groups are most impacted by the need to have expenses paid, and what are the practical things organisations should consider? May I turn to Paul first?
Yeah, thank you. So I think a big thing is about people not knowing that the volunteer expenses are available. So there's a huge perception that it costs money to volunteer, that you can't afford to volunteer. And that's so we know about that from our experience of refugees and asylum seekers. But it's not just they don't know they can afford it, they don't even know they're allowed to. And I think that it came up again with people not being aware of opportunities that are available. So I think transparent recruitment and public recruitment is key. But in terms of expenses and the practical things, there's a real culture of volunteering being for the white middle class retirees who do good, and they wouldn't take expenses from a charity, and so it means this thing where you can feel quite poor and needy if you ask for expenses. And it's people have said over and over, it's a horrible thing, it's quite degrading to have to ask for expenses. So for me, I just got myself into the habit of offering expenses to everyone. And I wasn't responsible for all the volunteers, but when I saw people, you'd just check in and go, hi, how are you doing? Have you had your expenses yet? And they would say, I'm still retired and I've still got a free bus fare. And I think that is less offensive than a volunteer who needs it going home without. So I would say, get in the habit of everyone in your organization asking everyone for expenses whenever you see them. It's really not offensive for people to say, still no, Paul, still don't need it, no, I'm fine. It really has a massive impact if they leave without.
That's really helpful, and that sort of chilling effect of, well, people don't really, as has been said in the chat, well, people don't really claim expenses here, and that sort of how excluding that is. So point well made. Coming, Baris?
Apologies, I feel like I'm hogging the mic, but these questions are fantastic. One of the biggest issues that I found in this is that because people don't claim expenses, you can never find out the actual operational costs of the organization. And because of this, when it comes to actually scaling the organizations, you can't really estimate or really have real figures that you can work off of. So even when you're looking at organizations like 3-5 year strategy, it becomes a real problem because you don't have a track record of exactly how much money was spent. So I think moving forward, I think this is something that every organization should definitely implement. Everybody should claim their expenses, regardless of your sort of economic situation. If you want to then donate it back, that's on you, but expenses need to be monitored.
It's a really good point, isn't it? What is the actual cost of this? Yes, very true. Caris, would you like to add anything? No? Excellent. Amy, come on in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, the issue of expenses is really topical, and I think, really reiterating the point about making them clear. That's something that we've highlighted in our main time well spent report as well, is there is that kind of proportion. It's kind of sizable proportion of people who say that they don't know whether their organization would they be able to claim expenses or not. We also found specifically in this global majority research that getting expenses paid is also more likely to encourage global majority non-volunteers to start volunteering compared to non-volunteers overall. So I think it's important to see it as both something that is important to kind of volunteers that are your current volunteers and their experience, but also in thinking about it as a barrier to volunteering for those kind of potential global majority kind of non-volunteers as well.
Thank you. And final comment from Paul, and then we're going to be saying goodbye to Caris. Come on in, Paul.
Just wanted to say about there's this tech app called vHelp. I put the link in the chat, and they allow you to claim expenses remotely via an app. Now, we don't use it because a lot of our clients are asylum seekers without a bank account, so it doesn't work for that. But if you do have bank accounts, it's quite good. One, because volunteering can then be discreet. It's people are empowered to do a photo, take their photo, and then within your organization, you can choose who can authorize that, so it can be paid straight away on the day. And then people, if they want to donate it back, they can choose to do that, but it's not so performative. It's slightly more discreet. Well, it's more discreet and it's internal. And that's just potentially a way of getting rid of that shame of claiming expenses.
That's a really helpful, practical way forward. Thank you very much to all of our panel. We're going to say goodbye to you now, Caris. Thank you so much for being able to join. And we'd love to see your daughter's headband in due course. That would be great. Thank you to Baris and to Paul. Now, before we close, we're going to go over now to Whoosh Raza, our Director of People, Culture and Inclusion, to give some closing reflections, and then we'll hear a final word or two from Amy as well. Over to you, Whoosh.
Thanks, Priya. What a fantastic way to start the day, and what a brilliant brilliant kind of lots of reflections, lots of really, really interesting points to take away from. So my thanks, firstly, I just wanted to start with some thanks, because this is a moment, obviously, for us at NCVO. This is such an important milestone for our research, and obviously what our research contributions have done. So this wouldn't have happened without the collective efforts of many, many people, and taking great care and great time. So firstly, wanting to start by thanking people for the thought that's gone into this body of work, and the influencing and engagement team in particular, and Ray's on the call, and Amy, who have been so brilliantly kind of exploring and making sure that that they took an inclusive approach in every aspect of the research. I wanted to also extend my absolute thanks to the panelists. The panelists were brilliant. Some reflections I was really taking away and that I was really struck with was starting with Caris. Her opening remarks was that she felt seen in the publishing of this research, and what an amazing feeling for that to happen. As someone who, I'm also British Pakistani, and I think for me, on a very personal level, this was I very much echo the sentiment of feeling seen, and that was brilliant. Baris, in really, really, really powerful reflections. I think the importance of faith has really come through in some of the kind of experiences that you've shared so graciously with us and through this kind of research. So a big thanks to Baris as well, and really struck me the point that you made, Baris, about you can't be what you can't see, and that was a really, really powerful kind of reflection there. And I just want to extend my absolute thanks to Paul. Your allyship as someone who's not in the global majority was brilliant, and really kind of made me personally, on a personal level, feel very, very safe to have this conversation with many of us this morning. So some closing reflections is that this is the first of the body of research, but by no means is the last. You know, we have to make intentional steps, and you have my full commitment to ensuring that we NCVO are going to be continually exploring the experiences of people from the global majority, specifically when it comes to you know, our sector and what that means. I was really heartened to see many of you talking about intersectional experiences. I think there's lots of conversations on the chat around taking an intersectional approach, and what does that, and really that is so important. As someone with an intersectional identity myself, you know, we're more than just one thing, right? We're more than just the color of our skin, and we're more than just, you know, one thing. And I think it's really interesting to start to explore, how does age fit into that, how does disability fit into that? And I know there's been great conversations that have taken place in the chat around that intersectional approach. I just wanted to also extend thanks to those of NCVO that have brilliantly led on answering many of your questions throughout the session. Alex and Chanel doing a brilliant job in terms of making sure that people have got the answers that they need, or at least have resources and being signposted to the right information. And of course, I just wanted to kind of mention that, you know, using the term global majority in and of itself is a big, you know, is a huge step forward for us, and really language is really important. Some real considerations and reflections that came out today, and it was great to see some of that conversation evolving, really around expenses, some really practical ways in which we can kind of consider the lived experience of those who are dedicating their time to support our cause, and really looking about the refugees came up as well, actually, which is a great example of different communities and different needs of different communities. The term global majority is huge, and within that term we have so many different communities and so many different kind of lived experiences, and it's really important that we take the time to understand those nuances and difference. We talked about assumptions as well, and lots of conversations coming through around, you know, the drawback of making assumptions and just asking the questions that we need to ask to be able to build more inclusive environments. And I'd just like to end by saying that all of this work, all of the time that's taken, and the conversations that are being sparked as a result of this, is to really enable each and every person who works across our sector to feel a profound sense of belonging. And I'm going to use the word belonging as opposed to, you know, equity, diversity, inclusion, terms that have been all over our TV screens and all over our ways of life for so many years. And I say it at a risk of potentially desensitizing to the term. It's ensuring that each and every person who gives their time feels a profound sense of belonging and feels able to contribute to the aims and objectives of the causes, the voluntary groups that they're there to do. So yeah, those are my final reflections, and I'm going to hand back over to you, Priya, but it's been a brilliant session, and thanks everyone for attending as well.
Thank you very much, Ush. And over to you, Amy.
Oh, thank you so much. We're just going to do a little bit of looking ahead. And before I do, it would be great to get your feedback on today's event. It's been so fantastic to see so many of you here. There should be a feedback poll just kind of popping up on your screen, and there will also be a kind of slightly feedback form that comes up after the call as well. But whilst you're kind of filling that out, I'll just mention the last bits, which is what's next. The full report is out now. There's a link in the slides that will be shared after this, and you can find it on the NCVO website. And I really would recommend you going. It's a really full report with lots more than we've been able to talk about today. And as we've said throughout today, the important thing is that kind of discussion and debate, and we'd love to continue it. There's a hashtag Time Well Spent 2023, so use it on social media, etc., to kind of continue that. We're also kind of continuing our tradition of having a follow-up event from these launch events, because we know that the kind of discussion aspect is really important. So we'll have a member over to you event in the new year, and importantly, we've got lots of resources available, whether it's guidance. We'd encourage people to look at the Vision for Volunteering, which has a specific pillar on equity and inclusion. We've got training, consultancy, and of course our membership. And in the report, as I said, there's a whole host of practical considerations to help organisations take that kind of next step. So really a personal thanks to everyone who's attended today, and we really hope that you enjoy reading the reports. Back to you, Priya, for just a final thanks and farewell.
Thank you very much, Amy, and thank you everybody for joining today. This is the start of this conversation, and we are so pleased to be launching this report today. Thank you to all of the team who have made it possible, to our fantastic panel, to Chanel Brooks and to Alex Barrow, our Director of Influencing and Engagement, for all of those Q&A responses. That's been brilliant. And we look forward to seeing you in follow-up events. Take care, everyone. Have a good day. Thank you.